Okay. I'm also going to turn on the note taking out because that really helps. Okay, thank you all for joining the IAC meeting. Today is, for the record, it's February 24th, 2025. And we're just going to do a quick roll call. So remember, we just need an audio yes if you are here, or a verbal yes is what I mean by that. So we have Felisa. Felisa, you might be on mute, but we're asking for a roll call.
Yeah, sorry, I'm getting a weather alert. I'm here.
Oh, okay, thank you. Okay. And then we have Marshall.
I'm here.
Roxy.
Here.
Okay. Becca.
Here.
Great. Beth.
Here.
Thank you. And then James.
Here.
Okay, great. And then Ikari.
Right here.
Great, thank you. Okay, thank you all so much. So we sent around the agenda. We're actually going to dive in pretty quickly because not only do we have a lot to cover, but some of the members here are only able to join for the first hour. And so if we lose them, then we won't be able to have that. We won't be able to take those votes if or they won't be included in the votes too. So let's dive in real quickly. We're actually going to start with some remarks by my colleagues, Hayden and Samuel, who are from the office of the COO. They're going to talk about the recent email that went out about the budget constraints that you all might have gotten to. It was sent from Travis, who is the interim COO for the county. And so they're going to give a brief overview of what that means for the program here. You're welcome to ask questions, but I do ask that if there's something urgent, feel free to ask it. But if there's not, due to the time constraints we have today, you can always email me and I can follow up with an answer for you too. So with that, Samuel and Hayden, would you like to take it away?
Sure, I can kick us off, Samuel. I know, or do you want to introduce yourself? I know you're dealing with a bloody nose situation.
Yeah, sorry everyone. Normally I'd be on camera. I'm got a bloody nose right before we got on the call. I'm Samuel Ashby. I serve as the Director of Strategic Initiatives in the office of the COO and within the office of the chair.
And I think everybody probably knows me at this point. I'm Hayden Miller. I'm a Senior Strategic Initiatives Manager in the office of the chair, working with Daniel and Samuel on our Spark unit. And yeah, and apologies, I just got home from driving through the gorge where it is very rainy right now. So we did just want to come for a few moments and hi, I'll just acknowledge, hi Kezia, I see you just joined. I'm Hayden from the chair's office from the COO's office. And we just wanted to give a quick update on the county budget process and where we're at. I know you all received an email from our interim COO, Travis Graves, on Friday. That was the day that the county put forward the department's proposed budgets for fiscal year 26. You'll recall when we had a few weeks ago, myself and Christian Elkin and Jeff Renfro come, they talked a little bit about the budget process, where we're at, and that really teed up for where we're at today. Just to go back real quick, in November, we received our most recent general fund forecast, which anticipated a $21 million operating deficit for this upcoming fiscal year 26. That could rise to a $52 million deficit without action being taken by 2029. So in response to that, Chair Vega Peterson directed almost all, there were a few departments exempted, almost all departments to submit up to 12% reduction packages. That included the Department of County Management, which is the department that this program lives in. And the instructions for that budget guidance were very clear that the departments needed to prioritize programs and services that are core to their functioning and core to their mission as it relates to the operations of Multnomah County. So that resulted in some really, really hard decisions that every department director has had to make, including our interim director, Travis Graves. And for our department, you can read the entire transmittal letter, which is linked in the email that was sent to you. We had to put forward approximately $4 million in cuts, including 22 positions and I believe a total of 16 different programs were affected. So that did result in the decision to include this program in the proposed reductions package. Really, I can't speak for Travis, but I know that he had to balance a lot of competing factors, including the core services to the county that the Department of County Management is responsible for providing. So that's kind of where we're at right now. The department submitted those proposed budgets on Friday, so they are available now. You can read them all on multco.us/budget. Where we're at, though, in the process, I want to be really clear. This is not a decision point. This is not a decision point for the Broad County budget, and it is also not a decision point for the decision on whether to move forward with implementing a campaign finance program. The next step in the process is the chair, Jessica Vega Peterson, is going to take those departmental proposed budgets and use the reduction packages that they provided with the knowledge that the overall amount of reductions proposed is more than what's needed for the organization to meet its constraints. But that gives her flexibility. So she's going to be working over the next month or so to develop a balanced budget, because we can't run deficits at all at the county. And that will then be presented in April to the public and to the board, followed by about 6 weeks of public deliberation, which will include community town halls, surveys, and very robust hearings with all of our departments really going in detail into their work and talking about how they would accommodate any proposed reductions. Last thing I'll just say, so that's kind of the next steps in the process. I want to really emphasize that, again, the work that you all are doing is incredibly important towards that process, because the recommendations that you're working on with Daniel and under his support are key to helping our board understand all of the factors that would go into this really important program. I can say, just from speaking my personal experience, having worked with our elected officials, having worked for Chair Vega Peterson, they understand, and they are incredibly they understand the importance of this work, of expanding our access to our democratic process, and they have all personally experienced the ways in which Multnomah County's campaign finance system is not functional at this point. That said, they also have to make a lot of tough decisions. So the work that you all are doing to present to them a very clear proposal and outline of what is needed in order to really fix these broken components of our campaign finance system is only more important, I would say, with with this latest news that this program is being proposed, included in the proposed reductions list. Because at the end of the day, the decision to create this program really will be at the board level. And they need to have that complete picture and understanding of both the cost, but also the key considerations from a policymaking standpoint in order to make a fully informed decision. So I just talked at you a bunch. I want to create space, Samuel, if there's anything you want to add. Okay. And then, oh, sorry, Samuel, I see you're off mute.
Yeah, no, I was just, again, wanted to support what Daniel said. I think it's obviously, it's an extremely difficult construct that you're in, right? And all of us in the county as well, because we're having to both deal with the fact that these constraints are proposed and not having clarity into exactly what will drive the decision that Chair Vega Peterson will ultimately deliver. And then also having to continue to move forward with the work, because that's the best way to actually inform her of the importance of the program, is to be able to show a fully robust program. And it's just the dichotomy. I want to acknowledge it.
Thanks, Samuel.
So Becca, you've raised your hand.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Aiden and Samuel. I really appreciate you being here this evening. I understand what a tough position everyone is in given the budget constraints. I just had two quick questions. One is for clarity. Just in looking at the materials that Travis included, I'm looking at the reduction package document that was included. So we are the Public Campaign Finance Program, and these are a priority number in terms of restoration. So is this the department's recommendation to the chair that is saying, if and when you're able to restore, this is kind of the order of importance? Is that the?
That
Okay.
is it, yeah. And I want to just really emphasize that those decisions, to the extent I can represent, because at the end of the day, those are our leadership's decisions, but the focus in that prioritization is on the operational needs of the department in terms of how and Multnomah County, the DCM in particular, is very much focused, like our role is really the corporate backbone. So I don't want in any way to create the impression that that is a devaluation of the work. It is really more around operational impacts in that prioritization.
Yeah, I really appreciate that and fully understand that, having experience with the county. The second, well, I guess I have two more questions. One is the total budget reduction. That is both FTE and was the 500,000 contemplating funds, and maybe this is a question for you, Daniel. Was the 500,000 in the budget FTE plus some seed money for a matching program, or was it mainly all the administrative? And I guess maybe that leads into my third question is, Daniel, you had said that folks at the county would be giving us some estimates of what the administrative cost would be to administer. And I think the cost will vary depending on what type of method of distribution we decide. But was wondering, is that 500,000 just the administrative cost? And then when we're contemplating building a budget, it would be on top of that 500,000.
Yes. So the way that currently the budget is written and designed, and I want to be also emphasize, I should have said this earlier. We as the department, myself, Samuel, Daniel, all the way up to our COO, we are going to be operating on the assumption that we have our what we call our baseline budget, which is our budget without reductions up until the new budget is approved. So we are assuming everything moves forward as currently funded. Now, there's obviously that important caveat that the program needs more funding in order to move forward with implementation. So I just want to make that point, Becca. To your initial question, the way that we set this up is the program is funded with $500,000 of ongoing funding. That includes both the salary for Daniel's position, the program manager position, as well as not all, because we roughly when we were creating the budget, we roughly estimated about $1 million needed in startups dollars. If you actually go back and look at the budget presentations I gave about a year ago or 9 months ago, we were initially asking for $1 million. What the board ended up doing was they said, okay, we will give you 500,000, and then we're going to put another 500,000, which I believe, I can clarify this, but I believe was that second 500,000 was one time only. That was put in, yeah, Samuel just confirmed that. That was put in, it was earmarked contingency. So it's held in our contingency, specifically earmarked for this. Our board made clear they wanted to have the chance to vote to move forward before releasing that other $500,000, which would require us to go to the board in order to pull it from contingency. So assuming baseline budget, that 500K rolls over. And the way that we set this up, the funds actually sit in a sub fund right now. So my understanding is should the program continue to receive funding, any unspent dollars in that 500,000 for this year would roll into next year. Now, the contingency, I'm not as sure about. I can follow up with our budget director, but I believe the contingency goes back into the overall pot of general fund dollars that that is used to create the budget. But that 500, the reasoning that they went with making that an ongoing investment was to kind of bake that first 500K into the operating budget. Does that answer your question, Becca?
It does. Yeah. Thank you.
Great. I think due to our time constraints, we have probably time for one more question, but before you start into that, Samuel, I think your hand is
Yeah,
raised.
and I also want to be really, really clear. The program and wasn't the only constraint package even rendered from my team. I actually had given up 2 FTE that were continuous improvement roles that were actually funded because this is a new department as recently as the last fiscal year. And so I want to make sure that we all understand kind of the totality of the proposed cuts package that was produced, not just from Spark, but also from DCM as well.
Okay. Time for one more question, and then we'll let these two go.
And if you have follow-up questions, sorry, Danielle, didn't mean to jump in on you. Send them to the public campaign finance email. I'm also checking that every day along with Daniel. We will make sure to get back to you directly. Myself and Samuel are taking the lead on responding to questions about the budget. So not in case anybody else has one more quick question, happy to take it. But I just wanted to let you know, if you think of something later, you can send us an email.
Okay, well, we'll let you two go. Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your wisdom and expertise on this topic. And yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to email us at that email address and we'll get an answer to you all.
And thank you again for all the work you guys are doing. It's really, really valued and really impressive and just very grateful.
Thank you.
Great. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Okay. Thank you all for that. Let's dive in. I'm sorry, we're moving at a lightning pace today because we're gonna lose members in an hour. So I want to make sure we get votes in if we have the chance. So moving on to methods of distribution, you have several items sent to you, and they were all sent to you ahead of time. One was a 2-part video of me explaining a presentation, as a recorded presentation, talking about different methods of distribution and analyzing 4 in particular. We're not going to go through it all again, but I think I will share my screen and just have the last slide up and do a very quick talk through just to give everyone a refresher. And then there's also a chart on distribution methods and the impacts that they have on staff administration and kind of a broader picture, what did each one accomplish? Where's the deficiencies with each one too? So I'm going to share my screen here and let's see here. Yes. Okay. So everyone can see my the methods for distributing matching funds. We are then going to go to the last slide here. I know it's a lot of text, but I'm just going to run through this very quickly too. The purpose being, again, to make sure everyone can see, if they haven't had a chance to watch the videos yet, that everyone's caught up on the same page. So there are essentially 4 types of methods of distribution. These are the most common ones that we see. There are, some programs do some things a little bit differently, but this is the core dichotomy. And so we have ratio multiple match program, a fixed grant program, and a grants and a ratio multiple match combination, and a vouchers program, which we see in Seattle. And so if anyone needs to follow along on a different screen, I'm on the last slide of the matching funds distribution method presentation. So a ratio multiple match, this is a commonly used formula, and what that is the donations that are qualified for a match, i.e., they're from individuals who live within the district or they live in the county or the city. Those donations from those individuals are multiplied by a ratio and then given to the campaign as they report them. So every time a campaign reports donations, we look at how much what the donation is and we multiply it by the same number. So maybe multiply times 9 or multiply times 5, that would be the ratio. The bigger a donation is, the bigger match it gets. The smaller the donation is, the smaller match it gets. So a $5 donation times 9 is $45. $20 donation times 9 is $180. You know, it's the most common method used in the US, and it is used by the city of Portland as well. It does incentivize active campaigning, so you have to keep going out and raising those donations to get more matching funds. That's a benefit of the program. Downside of the program is it is more unreliable funding for the campaigns. They don't really know how much they're going to get in terms of matching funds. It does advantage candidates from who have wealthier donors too, because bigger donations earn a bigger match. And candidates do have to wait quite a long time usually to build up enough funds to like make major decisions like buying ads or hiring staff. So that's ratio multiple match in a nutshell. Fixed grants is a little different, and this is used by like Connecticut, Albuquerque, Maine. Under that system, candidates get a fixed matching grant based on a number of qualifying donors. So if you get 200, let's say, I'm going to make up a number. If you get 250 people giving to you, then you would qualify for a fixed grant, and that grant may be, for example, $50,000. And you can do a single or multiple grant system, i.e., like under a single one, let's say you get to 250 donors and you get 50,000, and that's it. Or let's say you get to 200,000 and that's it. And under a multiple grant system or a tiered process, you get to like 250 donors, and then you get, let's say, 50,000, and then you get another 250 donors, and you get another 50,000. So you're breaking up that grant. And then there's total partial funding. Total means that you raise the donations, but then you give the donations over to the government, and in exchange, they give you a big block of matching funds. So that way, candidates are only really campaigning off of the matching funds. And then a partial funding system is you get to keep the money you're raising, and in addition, you get the matching funds provided to you. So that is fixed grants in a nutshell. There is a grant plus our ratio multiple match combination, and we see that in Washington, D.C., San Francisco, and Baltimore. In that version, candidates get a portion of their matching as a fixed grant, and then the other portion will be a ratio. And so, for instance, in Washington, D.C., once you qualify, you get $40,000 as that initial block grant. Everyone gets the $40,000, and then every donation you raise after that is multiplied by a ratio. So the ratio is like, I think, 5-to-1 in their case. And so the benefit is that allows for more stability than ratio multiple match, because candidates get those startup funds and they know exactly how much they're going to get to. In Washington, D.C.'s case, it's $40,000. And they get that early so they can like hire staff early. They can build out that website early, whatever they need to do. And it does promote active campaigning. Like once you get those initial grant funds, you are, even on top of that, you're still going out and collecting donations, and you're still campaigning and engaging people. The downside is it doesn't really resolve for the overall unreliable funding. You have the fixed grant up front, but then everything after that, you have an idea of what you're going to raise, but you never really know for sure until you actually get the match deposited in your account. And again, like wealthy donors or candidates who are supported by wealthy donors are going to raise more than candidates who aren't. There's also like a lot of administrative inefficiencies. It's tough to manage like both those programs kind of match together too. Finally, before I stop talking, we have vouchers, and vouchers are only currently in operation in Seattle, although Oakland is going to be implementing a voucher program too in the next election cycle. In that version, all people who qualify, the population gets a voucher or 4 in the case of Seattle, and they submit them to the candidates. The program redeems the vouchers and issues matching funds to a candidate. So if like 10 people turn in vouchers, each worth $50, then that's going to be $500, and a program will give you $500 in matching funds. I think the advantage is it's the most inclusive option, because nearly all the population can contribute without having to use their personal funds too. So it does remove a major income barrier. But I think the issue is it's furthest from the Portland program. So if you're putting the Portland program, which is a ratio multiple match, on top of the voucher program, which is for the candidates, that's going to be tough for voters and candidates and organizations to kind of figure out. And a lot more resources are generally needed for these programs too. And again, also provides that unreliable funding. Like campaigns may have an idea of how much they're getting, but it's at most an idea versus a fixed grant where they know for sure how much they're going to get. So those are the four in a nutshell. I'd love to hear your preferences and like where you all are leaning to. And then of course questions. So you might have questions from from what has been said before. So with that, I will turn it over. Kari, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit about the Portland program, the City of Portland program. It's we describe it as a ratio multiple match program, but in reality, the way it actually operated was much more like a fixed grants program. People hit those 3 tiers, and each of those 3 tiers, they basically got all the dollars. There were a couple of spots where somebody fell just a few bucks short of the full match, and then within like a week they'd max out that match. Am I misremembering that, or is that case that works?
Somewhat, so last time in the 2024 election cycle, the City of Portland did have 3 tiers, and you qualified for the first one, then like all your donations are matched up to $40,000. And then the second tier would be another up to $40,000, and the third tier would be up to $40,000 if you're running for city council. A lot of candidates did hit that $40,000, but that's because the number was lowered. So remember, Portland, the program was underfunded going into the 2024 election cycle. So they actually had to lower those tiers. They initially were going to be 100,000, 100,000, 100,000 for 300K total, but all those tiers were lowered. So a lot more candidates are going to reach the tier cap because the program wasn't giving enough money out. When the program was giving enough money out, it was, a lot of candidates did not reach the cap too.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Becca, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, and Daniel, I sent you, maybe 10 minutes before before our meeting, a series of questions. So I'm trying to think about which ones are, I think there's probably like 116 questions on the document that I sent you. I'll give you a couple that are general to kind of all 4 programs. One, in your research, did you get a sense, has there been any analysis about which systems have led to more or less independent expenditure activity? I think is one question. And then of these systems, is there consistency about the match or the cap in terms of contribution cap, and consistency in terms of which approach is more agreeable to an in-kind of democracy activities?
Yeah, those factors is a really good questions. And those factors are more dependent on like what the contribution limits are. In a program where they have high contribution limits and they allow for large in-kind donations, like the City of Portland's program, you might see more in-kind donations occur. It didn't necessarily happen in the City of Portland, but that's because of other reasons. But if you have higher limits, then organizations and individuals may be giving more direct donations or indirect or in-kind donations to the candidates. If you have lower limits, that will, kind of increase the independent expenditure spending. So that factor is much more based on the contribution limits than the programs. The thing to keep in mind though is like whatever matching system you all choose, it just has to make sure we're giving enough to the candidates that they can respond to independent expenditures or still get their voice out there, even if it's not like a one-to-one response to. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, you hit all of those.
Okay, all 160. Yeah.
I have more, but I'll wait for other people. I don't want to monopolize.
Okay. Yeah, James.
Mine isn't a question, but it was just a little bit more of my, feedback or response on it. One thing that you didn't cover, and thanks for the presentation, Daniel, it was really helpful and thorough. One benefit, I think, of some of the methods that is less present in the fixed grants program is there's kind of, because the funding goes out to candidates over a longer period of time, which has its own, you know, pluses and minuses to it, but it does allow for some enforcement checkpoints. And, you know, like I was involved in the voter-owned elections, the first program that the city of Portland did. And I do think that these programs are susceptible to a, you know, either well-meaning or less than well-meaning candidate misspending the money. And I think it's hard for the public to continue to support these programs if the media kind of amplifies, hey, this person paid their under it or whatever, like fresh out of college child, you know, $100,000 a year to run their, you know, campaign. And, you know, the more money that's given kind of up front, the less ability the county has to kind of recoup that or to make sure that like expenditures are being spent in accordance with the requirements of the program. And so that, I don't know, like that back end piece was one thing that definitely made me, you know, question or hesitant about like a grants program that gives out so much money kind of before we see any of the expenditures.
Yeah, great question. A great point. I think, you know, if we do I think if we take a similar approach to a lot of other programs, first off, the program would be auditing continually all the expenses that come out of the campaign. And in that audit, if it catches anything that would violate the rules or the law, you know, it could definitely step in. We have another subcommittee working on those expenditure limits to make sure money isn't misspent or misused. So a continual audit of the spending does help address that too and limit it. And then, you know, of course, there is also like a vigorous verification process up front. In the case of the grant, you are reviewing all the donations that come in, making sure that they're given by those individuals. They're not like, you know, falsified donations or forged donations. And then you're reviewing the signatures too and like verifying that the person lives in the county in this case. You would do that in a racial multiple match program as well. But in addition to that, you're also multiplying each donation by the amount too. So they actually have like a pretty similar racial multiple match, and fixed grants have a similar verification process up front. Except fixed grants has like one step removed from it. And then they have a similar like expenditure review program on the back side of it. I think the thing you're talking about, which is a really interesting point, is that with fixed grants, if you give a candidate $50,000 up front and then they misspend that money, then you know that certainly is not good for the program. It's not good for the optics of the program too. And there are ways to address it too. I think one thing you could do is you could get a little less upfront. And so if like, let's say you started by giving like $15,000 or $20,000 in the initial grant, and then later on, you know, if you get more donations, you get a bigger grant. That way you are kind of limiting the financial exposure that the county has, the candidates who are not serious about campaigning. But it is a valuable point to raise up too. Kari, your hand's raised.
Yeah, I want to understand, now that we're 22 minutes from the top of the hour, what's our mission tonight? Is to pick one of these four methods and just stop there? Or is it to pick one of these four methods and actually talk about what our thresholds are, what our timelines are, like building out the whole matching scheme? What's our mission tonight?
Our mission today, if you choose to accept, is to you know, make a recommendation on which of these core methods you all prefer. And then later on, whether it's after that tonight, I think the next step would be we're confirming the matching caps that are giving out to candidates. And then in the next meeting, we're looking at qualification metrics. So what do candidates have to do to actually qualify for these? And of course, like these programs are, I mean, these rules are all like interplay with each other too. And so, you know, I understand the desire to want to understand, you know, one conversation before making a recommendation here. And I think, you know, we do definitely have time to keep adjusting recommendations if you all feel after the next conversation on qualification metrics, they actually want to go back and rethink a matching funds thing based on that. You're certainly able to do that too. So we do have flexibility in that, but you know, we would like to certainly like get back to staff about where you all are at least feeling on this distribution methods question. Marshall.
I think I jumped a bunch of people online there, but I think just personal preference on this, I probably lead to the grants and the ratio multiple match option of the four. But to be completely honest with you, I see pluses and minuses to each one of these. I really do. So that's where I'm leaning right now. My least favorite is the voucher system. I think I'm not a fan of that at all. So that's just where I'm at.
Yeah, thanks for the temperature check. Lisa.
I think I lean toward the ratio multiple match system just so we can have alignment with the city of Portland. I think that is a big bonus there. Just a multiple match. And if I recall, the city of Portland, I think James alluded to it, but we literally had a grants program in the city of Portland before we had the current ratio match, and there was fraud in that program that shut it down. And then now we have the ratio match. I think he was being too kind and not as direct about what happened.
Yeah, we definitely had a voter-owned election system beforehand, and it was brought down by a series of scandals. You know, that's a challenging thing about these matching programs is all of them are going to have some, you know, you have to build in some expectation of fraud. And the small donor elections program that the city had also had fraud that happened too. So it's really about like how much are you able to audit the programs on either side, make sure that the candidates who are qualified are truly, you know, have community support. And then make sure you're watching the expenditures on the other side too. And you have those like continual checks and balances. So that's an important point to bring up. Becca, I see your hands raised.
Yeah, thanks. Just a process. I know that we're on an extremely etc. timeline, and I would feel more comfortable with a vibe check or a temperature check like we're already kind of naturally doing than at least for me, like a very strict vote, if only because we've done our own analysis, but we haven't had conversation with each other in depth, and unless we're doing it independently on our own, we're doing no formal community or stakeholder engagement. So I would just, you know, if we're gonna again vibe check or say this is our, you know, recommendation where we're headed, and we're going to build in some community engagement, I just want to flag that. And in terms of the vibe check, if we were, you know, if we did not already have an existing system by which it's important to align, and just looking at the outcomes of the voucher program, you know, if we had 7.5% of our registered voters participating, that would be like 45,000 voters, right? Actively engaged before they even cast a ballot. So like that to me and it's more equitable and, you know, all the things. So in a perfect world, I wish both the city and county had a voucher program. But I'm also super concerned with the confusion. And I guess I have a question, given what we just heard from Hayden and Samuel. Is there like the ratio match or the ratio with an initial grant between those two? Because a grant, a combo with grant and ratio isn't necessarily super confusing to voters and participants. I'll put a question mark around that. But is either one of those approaches better with a scalable budget? Meaning, like, if the county invested a certain amount that's a base budget for like FTE and a grant, then anything above that could go to match. I'm wondering if in the budget situation we're in, if there's an advantage of.
Yeah, great question. So I think with either one of them, what you can do is what the city of Portland did is, you know, if there's just a budget shortfall, you can always lower the total amount you can give out to candidates, which is called the match cap. And so, if you have a grant system, and let's say each, 3 grants, each are like worth, let's say $75,000. If you have a budget shortfall, you could lower it so each grant is worth $50,000. We don't want to do that. That's not ideal, obviously. That creates a lot of problems for the candidates, but you do have that easy option or that available option. And then it's the same with ratio multiple match. Both of them have a total match cap that they give out to candidates, and if they need to, they can lower the match cap. Vouchers is a little bit harder to unwind that. Once the vouchers are out, people are going to want to return them. And if you can't, if you can't redeem them all, that's going to be a problem. So in terms of administration expenses, I think the grants one is a little cheaper, because if you look at that distribution chart, which is on my screen now, and scroll down, I'm not going to be able to fill out the whole screen here, but the match calculations that come with ratio multiple match take up a lot of staff time, and you need sufficient staff in order to do it. And the county or the city fell behind in that effort because it did not have sufficient staff, and that caused so many problems for candidates and campaigns. So grants are a little bit easier because you don't have to do that match calculation. You just know this is the amount we're going to give to the candidates if they qualify to. So it's a little administratively leaner to run a grant program than it probably is any of the other programs here. And before moving on to other questions, I do want to say, we can go a little further beyond an hour on this. We might lose some members. So the important thing is, as long as we have 6 that stay with us, we can keep talking because we can still have a vote. So I do want to say that people need more time. That's okay, as long as we have 6 going through the whole meeting too. Curry.
Thanks. I do have to drop at 7. Help me understand a little bit more about why the fixed grant is administratively leaner. You have to verify every donation that they're a resident of Portland, and that they, the only difference really is it a donation, or is it a donation and how much was it multiplied by the factor, right? That's just a spreadsheet thing, right? How's that substantially different administratively?
Yeah, because, so with a grant system, as we're saying, we have the flat amount up front, very straightforward to be like, all right, this candidate earned $50,000 in grants, because that's what the grant is. We give them $50,000. Under, a ratio multiple match, we do the same process where we're verifying the donors live in the locality, and we're also verifying that the donor actually did give the donation, and there's no fraud in that effort. And then on top of that, we're also going through and multiplying the match by the match limit, because in matching programs, you typically don't match up to the contribution limit. You match a smaller amount. So like the City of Portland had a contribution limit of $350, but we only match donations up to $20 in that case. So, it just takes a lot of time. And we had, at the time, I think at the height, we had 6 casual staff members and me and the director working full time on just that process of multiplication. I think people might say, why can't you just develop an Excel sheet that would do that for you? And I will say the program did, work with a vendor to secure a very good website. But even after working, providing significant funding to that website, it still fell short. And there had to be a staff overview of all those donations to make sure there was a multiplication effort too. So it sounds like an easy problem to solve for. I can tell you that the Portland system never did come up with an easy way to solve for it. I'm not saying that there's not one out there. But.
On the vibe check front, real quick for myself, in a perfect world, I'm with Becca. I'd love the voucher program. I've been in love with that idea for 20 years. But I think in the real world that we live in, both because of its administrative overhead cost, and trying to sync up with Portland, I think I'm with Felisa, and I think we should just, as much as we can, match Portland and do the ratio multiple match.
Thank you for that. Beth.
Excuse me. Yeah, I pretty much agree with what Kari just said to the T. Just out of curiosity though, for the voucher program, has Seattle seen like higher participation rates among community members donating to I assume that they do because it doesn't cost community members anything. But do you know how vastly different that is from a matching program?
I think that's the final slide or second to last slide on my presentation. It shows that like in Portland, in the record year of participation, I think they had, what was it, like, 50,000 or 24,000 people donating. Thank you, Roxana. 24,000 people donating, and the city of Seattle had like double that. So at the height, at the last 2021 election, city of Seattle had 7.5% participation, which sounds small, but that was like 250,000 vouchers, 200,000 plus vouchers turned in. So it is higher with the voucher system. That's the benefit, is that everyone gets one and they can participate no matter their income level.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Yeah, sorry, I got to like the last 10 minutes of the video and I didn't quite have time to finish it.
That's okay.
But yeah, I agree. I think the matching program, just for simplicity's sake, in terms of keeping up with the same like program that Portland is doing, would make it much easier for candidates and donors alike to participate in the program.
Okay. Marshall.
Yeah, I guess I do understand the concept of trying to match up with Portland. I guess the question that I would have is, I think from an outsider looking in on how the city of Portland functioned in their first go round with small donations and things of that nature, I would not say it was a resounding success. And they are evaluating that process and looking at making changes. So I would really hate for us to adopt the same system that was already not successful in order to try to match a system that was broken, even though they're discussing having issues or discussing having changes. That's my opinion. I don't think the city of Portland's, small donor and city council races were all that great in terms of how they did their matching. I thought it was a failure personally.
Okay. Becca.
We talked a little bit about that in our in-kind subcommittee about, the desire to sync up and align with the city of Portland for consistency's sake. But because much of their program also can be changed by administrative rule and a vote of the commission. I mean, if we're going to align, then we just need to be super careful that, if we have a certain amount of match or a certain level of in-kind, that those two things can be changed by their commission. So what would we want to make sure was aligned as fundamentals that cannot be changed in the city's program because it's in their charter from the ballot measure? And then what things can be adjusted, and then what oversight process are we setting up that is aligned? So if it's adjusted, we can match up. Or if we adjust, they can match up.
Yeah. Thank you for the input. Kezia, I know you have to go soon, so I want to make sure you have a chance.
Yeah, hi everybody. I appreciate the discussion, and having been a candidate in the last election for the Portland City Council race, I will just say I have a perspective that's maybe a little bit different, but I also think that what was just discussed about like matching up to the Portland model, I don't think we can predict what the Portland model is going to be in the future. So this is the challenge for us. There may be changes that are made in Portland, and we just want to do probably the best thing that makes sense for the elections in the county, not predicated on what the city will do. So that's what, I'm going to push for that. And I think that every model that has been identified has some potential drawbacks. And this is really where we're going to choose what we see as the better of the imperfect options. But if I were having to choose between what's presented, I would probably choose the grant plus the ratio, and my interest is making it so that there is not disincentive for voter turnout and for the individuals that traditionally wouldn't vote to be able to cast a vote, as well as the non-traditional candidates to be able to participate in a program so that they could be able to raise funds. And I think that that's one of the things for me, like I want to reduce the barriers for individuals that may not have the time to do a ton of fundraising. So that we can have folks that are working and that they just don't have discretionary time, but also are competitive in their races.
Okay. Beth.
We're just discussing like the methods of distribution right now, correct? Like we can say we want to do a matching program, but that matching program can look different in terms of limits and qualifications and whatnot to Portland's program.
Totally.
And okay, because I think when I say, at least when I say like the matching program, obviously the methods of distribution are the same to Portland. That's what's easy to understand. I think that both Marshall and Kasai are right, where there were downfalls to it, but we are also able to see those downfalls that happen and make adjustments to our recommendation moving forward. So I just kind of wanted to center that, I guess.
Much appreciated. Felisa.
Remind me, I feel like the qualifier for the grants is an amount of money raised, or is it, so I know like Portland did, I thought it was signatures, or was it $5 contributions?
I have to go back and look at that for the voter-owned elections. I'm not sure
Do
what
you
that
remember,
was.
James?
It was 250 contributions to get in, signatures to get in. And then they were able to do fundraising with tiers.
I think Felicia's asking about the old voter-owned elections.
The
one-
old
20 years
voter-owned
ago.
one.
Oh,
I'll
I
go
believe
back and look.
I
I
think it was
kind of
$5
think it was
donations.
signatures. I think it was
I thought-
signatures. I will check.
Yeah, I think the one thing with the grants, I'd love to hear everyone's reaction to this, because what drew me to the grant system is number one, I think it's not like the Portland system is true, but it's simpler than that. I think candidates just know upfront how much they're going to get when they raise some money. And so they get 250 donors, they know they're going to get, let's say, 75,000. They get another 250 donors, they're going to get another 75,000. And so I thought it'd be simpler for the candidates, like, communicate that and also to like work that into their budgeting and their campaigning. And the second thing was, the grant system, it has like a more of an equity approach. It struck me as having a more equity approach because, again, like donors, who, it doesn't matter if the donor gives a big amount or a little amount, the candidate still gets the same amount in matching funds. And so it really is based on the number of supporters you have. And in a small donor elections matching ratio multiple match program, the problem is if you have a lot of donors who can only afford to give $5, you're going to get a smaller amount of matching funds than if you have donors who can give the maximum amount too. So those were two things that stuck out to me, but I'm curious to hear what people's reactions to that are. And Felicia, I saw you raise your hand. Felicia,
Sorry,
yeah,
I
right
just
there.
like can't work my mute button. My question on the grants program is, I feel like there is a threshold to get the grant, right? So I feel like that, because if it's a large chunk of money, I hear Kezia's point about having people who are working, getting to those numbers, sort of having some level of sort of certainty. I appreciate that. I feel like my question is like, what is that threshold? So is it signatures for the grant or is it donations?
Yeah,
And
that is. Oh, go ahead.
is it unique donations for each tier? Right. So if you get $250, this is why Portland's is a little bit of a combo. I think Marshall's earlier point, or a combo approach, right? Where if you get 250 donations, you get that first block of money. Your next 250 in those other cities, is it unique donations? Or is it another round off the same group?
It's usually unique donors, and that's the case in Portland too, because you want to show that you're like growing the donor base and engaging more people.
So I think when I think about the grant, there's benefits to it, but I also think like how you top out when you're trying to get to unique donors in that way. But I feel like the same is true of the voucher system. You're consistently trying to get unique donors.
Well, and that's also true in ratio multiple match too. Like candidates do have to get unique donors to qualify for, you know, the tranche of funding.
I apologize. I'm gonna jump off, folks.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Kari. Becca.
When I was listening to your presentation and reading the information about the different programs, I heard that the grant program was more, and I think you restated this, that there's evidence that the grant program is more efficient just administratively. And is that because of that, you know, you're just counting the number of donors, you don't have to do the math and figure out the match? Is that what the argument around more efficient on the administrative end?
Yeah, that's what we were talking about with Kari before, is
Yep.
you have that piece that's removed. And it sounds like a simple piece to solve for, but I can tell you in 2024, it definitely like caused a traffic jam in terms of candidates getting their money in.
And I just want to agree with you in terms of it is a more equitable program, right? $5 is equal to $50 is equal to $350 in terms of the match. My question is, I guess we can't really embed that to a ratio, because then, I mean, like, how could we bring that value into a ratio program? And now that I'm saying it out loud, I think the answer is, if you're going to do that, you might as well go with the grant program.
Mm-hmm. Please, I see your hands raised.
Yeah, I had a question for sort of Kezia about her thoughts on, I threw this out to the group too, a grant program, like you mentioned, that gives the money to the program, like you raise the money to the program, but then you get the block of money. That sort of creates that's a great equalizer, but I don't know.
And I think conceptually it's interesting. I don't know about what that means in terms of delay, because from a campaign perspective, like the ability to raise the resources to run your campaign is pretty critical. So I would state that as like, I don't know practically what that looks like, but you know, it in some ways a grant program seems cleaner. But timing, I think, would be important.
Or do you get it minus what you've raised, for example? So like if you raise $20,000, you get to keep your 20, but then you get another 20, you don't get the full 40. But if you've raised $10,000, you get to keep your 10, but you get 30. But it creates an equalization across candidates, regardless of the amount they raised. If you raise more, you get to keep it earlier.
Oh.
But I don't know how the other grant systems work.
Yeah, I think
That's not how they work, right? Oh,
No, so Arizona's got the clean elections model that you're talking about, where you give the money you raise over to the government, and then the government gives you the full amount you need to campaign with. And so they've been using that for a while. I would say Arizona is notorious for having like one of the lowest participation rates in the country, and I think there's a lot of other issues there. I don't want to like say it's just that reason.
Is there a delay, Daniel, because of that?
I haven't heard about any delays. I mean, I could, look into that further. But usually what they do is, the candidates will turn it over with one check, or, however they deposit the funds. And then, they've already been cleared at that point to get the clean elections money. So I wouldn't see why any local government would have a problem just like quickly depositing, the clean elections fund or the matching funds as soon as they confirm that the matching donate or the private donations have been turned over to them.
I think as long as, if there's thresholds that you have to meet, I could only see that would create delays though, because you would have to achieve a certain amount of whatever your war chest was and turn it over. And then that's the money you can spend. And the cash flow during a campaign is pretty critical for a candidate.
Mhm.
So, and timing is like everything. And that just, I mean, that would create complexities on the candidate side. I'm not sure how much this, like this is a conversation around that, but I'm just going to add that as it may be creating complexities so that people who are not professional politicians and running elections, it may be a disincentive for more of a novice grassroots candidate to want to do this.
Yeah, so if you look at that GAO report I linked to, I think one of the most consistent critiques of a clean elections program was that candidates felt they just could not get enough in matching funds to compete, and they could not get enough to, like, especially against independent expenditures. So that's the benefit of a partial grant program, is that they get all those matching funds, but they also get to keep the money they've raised from individual donors or organizations. And so they just have more money to be competitive with. And so I think that's like why the partial one solves for that issue, or attempts to solve for that issue.
I appreciate the discussion and I hate to do it, but I have to pop off as well. Thank you all.
Yeah.
Have a good night. Bye.
Thank you. Becca.
Have you seen in any of the public financing programs, I've seen some states in terms of their campaign finance laws make adjustments to the limits based on, like, if there's $1 million independent expenditure that your candidate or your opponent has, then your limit is raised or eliminated, right? Have you seen any interesting adjustments like that in any of the public financing programs?
Yeah, so it's a little tricky because it seemed really simple that, like, if there's, let's say $1 million spent in independent expenditures against you, then you would get, more matching, or you would get to raise your contribution limits or something. And that was, the problem is that in 2011, the Supreme Court struck that provision down of the Arizona program. Theirs was a little bit different. So in their case, the trigger was unlocked because if a candidate outside the program raised more, then the candidate running under the program got a bigger match. So that trigger was struck down for that reason. But I think a lot of experts say be careful about any kind of trigger provision as a result too, because the Supreme Court has kind of said, like, we're not so friendly to that option. So that is, I do know there's a program out there, and I have to remember to look which one it was, where it wouldn't be a trigger. It's just like whenever a candidate applies for a contribution limits raise or a matching funds raise, they could receive it. So the rise is not based on a trigger, it's based on the application that the candidate submits. So that is the way around it, quote unquote. But I think it just, you have to make sure you're, like, controlling for those factors, and how do you make sure you're only accepting those applications, when the timing is right, and not because candidates want more money. I see you have your hand raised again.
I know I have another. So I actually just today was at a gathering there where some polling information was shared that was post-election polling that essentially one of the findings, there's lots of great findings around RCV in general and Portlanders being happy with the election. But one of them was that folks were overwhelmed by the number of candidates on their ballot for the districts, and that they weren't getting enough information about the candidates. And I say that because, is there any program that has directed the use of the public dollars, saying that it has to be spent on direct voter contact, or have there been any parameters spent around them other than general state law and election law parameters?
Yeah, most matching programs do have parameters on what you can spend the matching funds on, and the focus there is, like, preventing abuse. And so the city has that, and I think the committee working on, the committee with Marshall and Kari are working on that too. But they, prevent, for instance, candidates from paying for services that are well above fair market value, or paying family, or traveling, to far outside of the Portland area. And then prevent them from, like, giving gifts or donating the matching funds to, like, other nonprofits. So that's really meant to, like, reduce the potential for abuse. Although there's like, as a result, I think like candidates are trying to like incentivize to spend more on those those direct communications. The problem is, the trick is like, how do you make sure that candidates are spending the money in a way that they reach out to voters, but also we're not like overly prescriptive of what candidates do? Because, some candidates may say, the approach I want to take is canvassing and knocking doors. And some people want to say the approach I want to take is television. And so how do you like allow for that innovation and that like different approaches too? So you're not telling candidates you have to spend on like this kind of direct voter communication. So like it's a challenge, but that's not impossible to solve, I'm sure. I think James, I'm just reading your comments in the thread to make sure I can answer any questions that you might have posted. So bear with me.
Oh, I mean, there were no questions you need to answer. I feel like it's not. I am most excited about a voucher system, and it's hard for me to see how we would develop a voucher system on the timeline that we have in order to be ready for 2026. I mean, not just for these 10 talented people to answer 1 million questions of how it would work, but then also how do you put the things of the county in place for it to work? How do you train everybody? Like that seems impossible to do.
Yeah. Well, so we have unfortunately, we have lost more members, and we are now actually short of quorum. So we're not able to take votes, which is sad, unless Long is able to join. I texted them and asked them if they could please hop on, but I don't know if that's going to happen. I think what we can do is we can certainly like ask people for a temperature check and find out like where the points of consensus are, or like what's definitely off the table for people, and at least kind of narrow it down. We're having a meeting soon with the office of the chair, and they've been hands off. They want to like make sure like you all have the space to make your own decisions. But it would be helpful to come to them and say like the committee is like leaning one way or the other. So I'm definitely happy to take more questions, like by all means. But I think like in lieu of being able to take a vote, maybe I might ask that people, just like give me a temperature check or like what they definitely don't want or definitely do want in there too. Felice, I saw you raise your hand.
I felt like people did give a temperature check. I think everybody gave that before they got off. And so I feel like my general sense was people liked the voucher. Some people, not everybody, some people liked the voucher system, but have the same concerns that James does, that it really came down to a question between matching funds and grants, and that there were pros and cons to both of those. I feel like doing a summary of that. And then to Becca's point earlier, what would be great is if we had sort of a timeline decisions mapped out. And then I don't feel like we could have a meeting where we voted on a recommendation written up based on the vibe checks that we're giving you. So that you would then bring us a recommendation at our next meeting and we could be like, yeah, that's what we talked about. Yes, okay. We support that recommendation, or let's tweak it this way or that way.
Okay. Yeah, and on the timeline question, so I've been working with staff on this. I think the hope is to present to the board by mid-April, which means that they want I think the hope is to have a deliverable, i.e. the report that I write, that I run by you and you all like edit and, make sure it reflects your voice accurately. That's going to have to be before mid-April too. So the latest that could probably be is the week of April 7th. But ideally, the report would be at least drafted by March 31st. So what I'm thinking is, not every decision has to be made by that point. Obviously, I hope most are, but not every decision has to be made by that point. I'm thinking that like as we go through these recommendations, whenever you all decide on something, I'll type up that section of the report. And then that way was kind of be like a rolling basis where you all are making policy decisions and the report is getting typed. And then I will turn that report over to you all. It would just be my first draft. And then you all will have like ample time to edit it and like make changes that you think reflect your voice. And then it would be finalized and then it will be handed over. So that's a rough time we're looking at. That's a rough timeline I think we're looking at.
I appreciate you laying out that timeline. It would be great to see that in a meeting. Like this meeting, we're talking about this and need to make a decision by the next meeting on that. This meeting, we're talking about this and need to make a decision on the next meeting on that. Here's where you'll see draft 1 of the report. This meeting, we're going to adopt the report.
Okay.
And then I feel like you've gotten the vibe check from us. So maybe this section of the report you write up and either bring that back to us at the next meeting or at the when you give the report.
Okay. I appreciate that. James, I think you've had your hand up the longest.
Well, yeah, there's like, since I put my hand up, now there's like 3 different things. I guess the most important thing to say is that I don't see with 2 more meetings of the committee how we can do what you just laid out.
Right.
I mean, all of the subcommittees have been off working on their things. We need to then hear from each subcommittee everything that they deliberated about and want to present back to us. And then we need to discuss that, deliberate about it, and vote as a committee. Like, I don't see us doing that on 4 different areas, plus the things that weren't sent to subcommittee by the end of March. I mean,
Yes.
yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry. I didn't interrupt you.
That's it.
Yeah, so actually that was something that was on hoping to discuss with you all. You know, I do think because of that time constriction that it would be a challenge to get the full IAC's recommendations on everything in 2 more meetings. I do think we could do it if we met for March, just for March, once a week instead of once every 2 weeks. We would be able to have a little bit more time to get through these recommendations. I know everyone is feeling stressed about having to balance this with other, priorities and other work. And I think a lot of people feel certainly stressed then as is. But allowing us to meet, if we just put 2 more meetings on the calendar for the month of March, so we would have 4 in total, I do think that would give us space to be able to at least make it through 90% of the recommendations by the time you get to that March 31st goal of having the first the first draft finished. And then we would have at least one in early April, so that would be like 5 meetings in total before the report is turned over to the board. I wanted to run that by you all because I had the same reaction looking at the timeline.
I personally think that's a good idea and would be willing to add those extra meetings. I think also we might want to consider changing the meeting time, as it seems like the majority of folks are not able to come to these meetings. Because I feel like we've had quorum issues time and time again. And I know it'll be nearly impossible to find a single time and date that works for everybody on the committee. But I feel like the folks who are here right now, in addition to a couple other folks who had to hop off early, have been really consistent at coming to meetings, and it seems like we just keep not having quorum. And I think that's also adding to the delay in the process.
Yeah, I don't want to spend a lot of time in this meeting calendaring, but I think you're totally right on that one. And maybe if we just transition to like Friday mornings at 9 a.m., because that has, typically been a better turnout. That could be consistent. But before we dive into that, Becca, I know you've had your hand raised for a while too. I want to give you a chance.
I also would be willing to go to weekly meetings in March. And I just wanted clarity for when you said 90% of the recommendations, what I have that we need to come to agreement on are method of distribution, funding mechanism, if at all, / budget, oversight, limits and in kind, and then related to all of those, charter, referral, or no? Are there any other big buckets that I'm missing?
Kind of. Funding is actually done. You all did that last time. So you gave me a budget recommendation and you gave me the funding formula. And so, you know, we now have that ability to like put those numbers together and bring them to decision makers. I think the next thing is like methods of distribution, confirming the matching cap, and then the charter amendment, and then looking at the recommendations from the subcommittees where there's going to be what the oversight looks like, and then the contribution limits and the expenditure limits, and then the in-kind donations, what that policy is going to be, and then violations and penalties. And some of these, I know it sounds like a lot, some of them actually might be really quick conversations. And then reporting requirements too. I don't anticipate that would take a long time, but it is something that we have to like have a recommendation on. So it's 9 in total. If we have 5 meetings between going forward up until early April, that would allow us for basically 1 hour per topic to be able to cover it. But again, I think some of those are actually going to take a lot less time because some of them are like pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And before Marshall had, I know we decided on the $5 million recommendation. I'm also wondering, given the conversation that we started off the meeting with, if folks want to revisit, like that's the aspirational budget. Is there a, bare bones base budget that we would want to consider given, or is everyone just okay with that? We don't have to decide this today, but when we reconfirm or revisit budget, that's just something that I'm thinking about.
Okay. Appreciate that. Marshall, I know you've had your hand raised for a while.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to respond to the 5 meetings in March idea. And just to be completely honest with you, I'll do the best I can to make those, but I doubt seriously that I can commit to 5 meetings in March. And it's much along the lines of what we said. And when we first got together as a group, we're already meeting a lot, especially with our subcommittees. I don't have the bandwidth for it. And I'll be really honest, it's going to be beyond frustrating if we meet and I go out. I know this is just speaking personally. If I go out of my way to make those meetings and we don't have a quorum. So that's, and I really fear if we just ramp up the number of meetings, much like we're doing right now, we can't finish this meeting tonight because we don't have a quorum. And so I'm a little frustrated with that, to be honest. And I get everybody's busy, but adding more meetings, I'm not sure if that's the right solution. So that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think I've definitely been like sending out a lot of reminders to people to make sure they join, but we can also discuss like a minimum number of meetings that are required. Meaning like if you sign up for it, we do need you to show up for it. So I'm trying to think of other ways to add to the issue. But yeah, I definitely hear that frustration, and I also share that frustration too. Becca, and so I think in terms of public engagement, we've been waiting to get guidance from the chair's office on that, and I think we have a little bit more guidance on it, although I'll have that more confirmed on the meeting on Friday. But I think the guidance is going to be that there is, we have a very tight timeline. And so the thinking right now is that we focus on discussing these policies, options. Then when the report is finished, then there is a significant amount of revving up of the public engagement because it will take a while for the board to actually make their vote. And so there's a lot of time between when you all make a recommendation and the board votes, and that might be the optimal time to really bring in the public engagement piece. And ideally, in ideal circumstances, we'd be able to do it all the way throughout, but we have this like time construction in it. That still allows you all to have meetings or take input from members of the public organization. So like if you're talking to someone, you're welcome to share what's been talked about so far. And then, if you if they want to share input you can direct them to email me, and then I can like distribute it to all members of the public. But I think the thinking is get that recommendation set out there, and then dedicate significantly more time to community engagement, organizational engagement once we once the recommendations are finalized in a report too. Yeah, it's been on my mind too. We really want to make sure we make room for engagement. Absolutely. Lisa.
I agree with Marshall on adding a bunch more meetings instead of sort of using our time very efficiently at these meetings. I thought what you did today about sending out the materials, going through that quickly, and then driving toward the vibe check, I think was really good. I feel like we actually don't need to vote on each recommendation until a specific time. So I think pick a meeting where we're going to vote on all of the recommendations, have the recommendations based on those vibe checks typed up and ready to go, and then drive to a quorum at that meeting. Is sort of my preference here, so that when we get to the moment where we're actually making decisions, that it's clear that people need to come to that meeting to make decisions.
Okay, that's appreciated.
And then, this is unfortunate, but like, the world is ruled by those who show up. So maybe the time change works, maybe it doesn't work, but like we got to just get there.
Yeah. Beth.
Would going that route that Felisa just said, like us doing vibe checks and then voting them all in one meeting, would that still allow you ample time to write up the report? Like, would you be able to write it up based off of the vibe checks? I know it's like probably might add a little bit more stress on your part. So I just want to make sure that that's also works for you.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I have to like think a little bit more through like how I would structure that. So I don't know if I have an answer quite yet for it, but I appreciate it. I think if we are going to schedule the votes for later on, in late March, early April, I think that's fine. I think that I can definitely report back on like where the IEC is leaning, and that would be really appreciated. I do worry that like I want to make sure there is enough time in these meetings for discussion though. And so, if we still have only 2 meetings in March, even if I send you all the materials ahead of time, there still needs to be ample time to actually like talk about these and, be able to share your perspectives and thoughts on it too. And I just don't think we're going to be able to do it in 2 meetings. So maybe there's another format to be able to like do informational meetings with you all. But I don't think 2 meetings will cover it, even if we just do the votes at the end. It does solve for the quorum issue though. That does help with that, which I appreciate. Yeah, okay. I appreciate that, Felisa. Thank you. Well, just to go back, I want to make sure I'm going to go back. Of course, like, I always watch these videos again to make sure I'm capturing everything accurately, but it would help me to make sure, like, just have like a synthesized answer from you all on the vibe check question, because we've been talking about it. I just want to make sure I'm getting it accurately. So between the 4, we have the vouchers, we have the ratio multiple match plus the grant, we have the grant, and we have the ratio multiple match. Just very quickly going around the room, could you all just like synthesize your vibe check for me?
I would personally say ratio match, and then I guess if I was ranking, I would say ratio match and then the grant. Yeah.
Marshall.
I would lean to the grant first and then ratio match. Meaning you get your grant money, so you get started, and then you get ratio match after. That was one of those options in the previous where I was at.
Yeah. Okay, great. Just making sure I capture that right. Okay. So I have Marshall for ratio multiple match plus grant. I have Beth preferring ratio multiple match. Thank you for that. Okay. James.
I'm fine with any of the programs. I think they all have pluses and minuses. I mean, I think voucher is not realistic for 2026. I guess I would lean slightly towards a grant followed by the ratio multiple match, but I would support either.
Thank you for that. Becca?
Ditto. I lean towards the grant plus ratio, but I would be fine with ratio and wish we lived in a different world where we could do vouchers.
Felisa?
I agree on the grant plus ratio multiple match.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Okay. Okay. You know, unless there's any other questions, you know, I want to make sure we're using our time wisely. So we can do an informational overview and get a vibe check for the match caps and just formalize that as a policy. You know, okay, we can't do a vote, but we can do the vibe check on that. Do you all feel comfortable proceeding on to that topic? Yeah, Becca.
The short answer is yes. I'm also wondering, and I'm sure you've provided links somewhere, but could you reshare a program that does the grant and ratios and all of the machinations of that program, just so we have some detail about what it could look like?
Yeah, I shared a little bit on a presentation. I think Washington, D.C. is the most prominent one. They're like, in terms of population size, the closest to us. San Francisco also does it. But you asking me to share like the specific links to those programs to like go into the policy on your own time? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, yes, please.
Okay, gotcha. No problem. Okay. Well, unless there's nothing else on method of distribution, we'll move on. DC. Okay, great. So, you know, you all in your last meeting, you looked at the budget and you based a budget analysis on many factors, but one of the things you looked at in that budget analysis was, you know, kind of a simulation for how much we would give to each candidate. And so you all approved a budget recommendation that incorporated that I think like was based off that, but we actually are going to need like the specific policy outlined for how much we are giving out to candidates. So this is called the match cap again. So if you look at the document, I'll share it on my screen too. But if you look at the document, it's called match cap policy analysis. This is going to incorporate all that in. I don't mean to say there's just two options, but those were the two that were like in the budget analysis already. So that's why I listed those two out. Okay, so it's just taking, yeah, there we go. Perfect. Okay, so match cap number 1 was the smaller amount, and match cap number 2 was the bigger amount. The bigger amount is based off of, you know, the math we were looking at was the historical spending patterns and contribution, the fundraising data from candidates who raised more money, like the top fundraisers, if you will, in the field, which gives us a sense of like the more ambitious amount that candidates could raise versus the match cap option 1, which are like historically contested races. What does this look like too? And the reason that's lower is because match cap option 1 also includes candidates who didn't raise a lot, but still were competitive or even won. And so that's why the average is a little bit lower. But do keep in mind, like, it's pretty unusual for candidates to raise $50,000 to win a commission race. That is pretty low. So it does happen, but I wouldn't say it's I'm a little worried about basing policy off of like those anomalies too, which is why there are two options here. So match cap option 1, match cap option 2, the program would give a candidate for chair up to $500,000, and then option 2, they would give them up to $650,000. For the candidates running for commission in all the districts, they would get either $250,000 total in matching funds or $400,000. For candidates running for auditor, Actually, I think either way is $25,000 because that's like both the average and the top amount that candidates raise. Although you could certainly like, we can talk about other numbers. And then sheriff, it's 75,000 versus $90,000. I'll scroll down and show the analysis just to refresh everyone's memory about it. But those are kind of the two sets of numbers. And do remember that candidates are also able to keep the money they are raising from individuals or organizations. So like a candidate for chair isn't just going to have 500,000. They'll have 500,000 from us plus all the money that they're raising too. So as we scroll down here, and this is a reminder of like what are we keeping in mind to note. And I think we've already talked about most of these too. Oh yeah, you're not specifically budgeting for special elections as we talked about before, but we're including enough to sustain the fund if a special election were called. So this is the first option, which is a smaller amount too. So you can see these are the number of candidates we're expecting to run based off of historical patterns. And we also added one candidate in to every single race to like allow for an additional candidate to run. And, if there's more candidates to run than expected, we want to make sure we can sustain that financially. And we took that number, we multiplied it times the amount that we'd be giving them, and then that's how we get to these numbers at the bottom. And so then scrolling down a little further, this is the critical thing to definitely show you. This is the total need is based on the amounts that they were able to raise and spend before limits came into place. When there are no limits in place and candidates could raise as much money as they wanted, this is how much they got to on, generally on average. And then you have the average fundraising there too. And those average fundraisings are after limits. So once the limits are then adopted, then, District 1 or candidates for county commissioner on average raising $110,000 for chair, $208,000 on average. So we get the matching fund amount because we take the total need they had before limits were adopted and subtracted it by the amount they're able to raise after limits come into place. So the difference, for instance, in the chair's race is the total need is $712,000. They're on average able to raise $208,000 once limits are adopted. They're $500,000 short of what their total need was. So the matching program gave them $500,000. Their campaign budget would look like this, which is pretty close to what they were able to raise in total before limits came into place. So that is the overall structure of these. Felice, I saw you had a question.
Shocking. I feel like I understand the structure of how we got to these numbers. I'm concerned that the recommendation is based off sort of this historical averages pre and post and et cetera. And I think that's helpful information that helped us set the not the per voter, but the per eligible voter number by district. And so I'm worried that we're losing that piece in the conversation.
Are you talking about? Sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
Are you talking about specifically like the funding formula that was developed last time and how this would impact it? Oh yeah, I can show you that too.
So I think I don't need to see the funding formula. I think like if I were to go back to your sort of outline on the match cap policy about this number at the top, this 500,000, right? Because we're deciding for or 650, what have you, whatever the cap is, the match cap 1, match cap 2. I think one of the discussions that we had last time on the formula, to me, the match cap should change with the number, with inflation and with the number of eligible voters.
Right. Yes. And so I think I do have the inflation number here because that is incorporated into here. So 2026 inflation, 28. And I will point out that this is again is that lower number, that lower match amount. And as we go on to inflation, we're assuming a 3% increase in inflation. That's what most inflation calculators give us. So as we're getting through these years, we are seeing more of a divide or like a more of a separation. Like the funding need is likely going to outpace the campaign budget. If we're just giving them 500,000, 250,000. So once we get to 2030, a chair on average is going to need around $826,000 if they're running for that position. And under this, they're only going to be able to get $741,000 between the amount the matching funds are getting and also the average fundraising too. So we did try to weave in the inflation changes. If you go to the higher amount here, which is actually kind of like closer to where you all based that amount on, because you had $5 million and that was incorporating if you remember, the 4.545 million. Going here, the inflation, when you adjust for inflation, actually we're still keeping pretty close if you have the higher match amounts too. So in 2026, the need is 879,000 and the total campaign budget would probably look at around 893,000. You get down to 2030, the need is 990,000. The campaign budget is 924,000. So it makes sense if you provide them more money, you're able to generally keep up with inflation coming through too. So we are trying to adjust for that as well. I'm not sure if I answered all of your questions though. What are other folks' reactions, or do they have more research they'd like me to get for them?
My sense is that 500,000 for the chair race seems low, but 400,000 for the commissioners seems high. So I'm kind of like, I mean, I don't know. This is all just like back of the envelope, and I know we like looked at all of the math. So I mean, I believe if this is I guess I can see either one. I am interested in the conversation of like, if we were to go with the, grants or whatever, like where would we put them that would make up this, 250,000 or 400,000 or whatever match? Because I do think not every candidate is going to completely max out. I mean, even viable candidates, I don't think they'll all max. And so that to me relates to like how much it is. I mean, my instinct is like 650 for chair feels reasonable, and like something less than 400,000 for the districts seems more reasonable. I don't know if it's 250,000 or 300,000 or something, but I don't know. That's my armchair estimates.
Okay. So you're thinking 650. Okay, for chair. I'm sorry, what were the numbers you said looked more right to you for county commission races?
Well, either the 250 that you have in match cap option 1, but I could even go like a little higher than that, like 300,000 or something for those races.
Okay. And again, no need to, we don't have to make a firm decision now. We're just getting that like initial impressions. Felisa?
I think Marshall had his hand up for.
Oh, apologies, Marshall.
Hey, no worries at all. I'm in total agreement with James. I would flip the 2 chair amounts and put the 650 over in column 1 and put 500 over in column 2 and then take column 1. I would be comfortable with the 250 for commissioner races and 650 with the chair. That was like, as soon as I saw that chart, that's right where my brain went.
Okay. So you're 650K, but everything else in column 1 looks right to you.
Yep, that's correct.
Okay, thank you for that. Whoever's next.
I'm fine with the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah. So am I generally, just if we're bringing it back to centering the voter, what are there, 576,000 or so registered voters in Multnomah County, and 150 or so in each district. 250 is fine. It is also not a fourth of the chair's budget. right? If we were actually splitting it, like if the
Mhm.
$650,000 was split into 4 districts, assuming that all 4 districts are generally the same size in terms of registered voter. But 250 is fine. But I would even maybe go lower.
Oh, okay. So I'm sorry, just to repeat this back to you. This is 650 for chair number. Does that seem right to you, or are you saying a different number for chair?
No, that's fine. What James and Marshall have agreed, like generally, I'm fine with both of that. Both of. What was
Okay.
it? 650 chair, 250 district.
Mhm. Okay. James.
Yeah, I have a question. I mean, this is just like pennies on the whole thing, but for my friends who are more who have run a lot of campaigns, like what does $25,000 buy you?
A mail piece, roughly.
One mail piece,
In a
and that is
district,
enough
yeah.
to cover one mail piece countywide.
No, not
No, in a
countywide.
district.
No.
Right. So, like, I mean, we don't.
$25,000 buys you one mail piece, yes, in a district race, not countywide, and that's if you did it to every single voter in the district. If you could cut, most people would cut voters, right? So you only do it to frequent voters because you can't afford actually to mail to every voter, and it buys you maybe a week and a half of digital, 2 weeks of digital, roughly.
I guess I'm asking the question because, like, I'm fine. I mean, the auditor race has not spent a lot, you know, historically, whatever. But it just feels weird to include an amount that is like silly for actually running a campaign. I mean, you know, I'm fine with whatever, but I feel like bumping the auditor amount up maybe to like 50,000, where it's like they could at least have a mail piece that went to likely voters countywide. And even if they didn't end up using it, at least the program looks like, hey, you could be a competitive candidate for auditor and participate in this program.
Felisa.
I agree with James on the auditor. I think the other piece of the auditor is we don't have, it is a restricted seat. So you have to have a set of qualifications to be the Multnomah County auditor, which I am not recommending we take off. I think that's great. They should have that set of qualifications to be the auditor. But I also feel like that is a race where there's very low voter information. So increasing that number, even, and most of the time, because it's a restricted seat, you don't have a lot of competitive races, so they probably won't hit the full match. If they do, because it's a low information, more voter communication is better than none at all. And 25,000 is basically none at all. I think the sheriff seat is roughly the same. You have to have, very specific qualifications to be the Multnomah County Sheriff. That's why they've been more competitive than auditor, but not very much more competitive than auditor, to be honest. So I don't know if you match the auditor and the sheriff based on that sort of their niche seats.
Well, I will say that the charge of this is to, I think they would be, it was originally envisioned that auditor and sheriff would be included in the matching program. So
my other question is doesn't the DA run under Multnomah County elections? No,
no, actually, yeah.
They're not covered by that. Got it.
Yeah. Okay, so Becca, you said agreeing on bumping up the sheriff. Actually, could you read your comment for me?
Oh, sure. I'm just saying that I agree on bumping up the auditor and then the sheriff as well. If we're bumping up the auditor, and this table, if we're bumping up the auditor to, well, one of them said 75 to 75, because again, that's probably like the basic level of communication. And then the sheriff up to 125, especially if we are adjusting down the match for for the districts from the 400,000.
Oh, I see.
I
Please.
also think just the other piece on the rationale is because they are kind of little known niche seats, it's very hard to get individual donors in those races. Like if you run for, people are like, wait, you're running for auditor? Like that's a job that people hire. Like, what are you talking about? Like they don't give you money to sort of make the grant or to make the match will be more difficult for both the sheriff or the auditor.
Beth, we haven't had a chance to hear from you in a while too.
Yeah, no, sorry, I was just taking in everything. I agree with everything that everybody has said, though. I think moving 650 over to column 1 and sticking with 250. I think Lisa brings up a good point around like people might not qualify, like people running for auditor and sheriff might not even qualify for the matching program. That being said, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't offer it to folks. And if there's a really great auditor with really great community support, but maybe not a lot of money, then all more power to them to get that matching fund. But yeah, no, I'm very on the same vibe as everybody else.
Yeah. And I will say, like in 2022, Portland had a competitive auditors race, and both of them actually qualified for the program and got matching funds. Marshall.
I don't know the answer to this question because I don't follow these races that closely, but like for auditor, oftentimes there's just one person running. Is that not the case? And many times even, I mean, that's where I think if we looked at kind of what these would be ones, I really feel like we could look at the historical data for the amount of money raised and use that as a guide, because I remember that City of Portland auditor race, and that was a rarity because there were two really qualified folks running, which was weird. So that's why I remember that. So.
And I will say, actually, in the last, certainly in the last 10 years, there's only been one competitive sheriff's race, and that was recently, and then one competitive auditor's race, and that was in 2018. So that's, you're right, they are, it's rare to have a competitive race, but they do happen. Lisa.
I also think it's rare to have open seats in the auditor and the sheriff.
Mm-hmm.
So that also, like when somebody's elected auditor or sheriff, like the City of Portland auditor was a rare open seat. And so that also, so you had a combo of an open seat plus voter owned elections, which actually encouraged those two candidates to run. I don't think they would have run without the program.
Yeah.
And so I do feel like, I hope that by having like a good number in the auditor and the sheriff piece, that we actually could encourage people to step into these places if there's even without an open seat. But if I think people are more likely in an open seat, and we keep churning through sheriffs like nobody's business. So maybe we get an open seat and it sort of incentivizes people who don't think about it to run.
Becca.
I should know this, but do either the auditor or sheriff have term limits?
At the county?
Yeah.
I actually don't know. I'd have to look into that. I know that it's true for the other races, but I'll look into that one. Because that might make sure we have more open seats in the future is what you're saying. I see. Okay, so actually I did hear two numbers out there. Initially we were talking about $50,000 for the auditor, but then I think Becca also brought up $75,000 for the auditor. So I just want to make sure I'm capturing this right. Do people have a preference on 50,000 versus 75,000 for the auditor's race?
And I corrected myself down to 50 to the auditor.
Oh, okay. Apologies.
I was looking at the wrong table.
Okay.
And I like the numbers that Becca put in chat. That's exactly what I was thinking. 50,000 for the auditor, where it's like enough to have an actual campaign if, it's competitive and if you're able to raise enough, matching contributions, which there's a lot of ifs there. But if so, like they could, at least have kind of a minimal campaign. And then I do think, the sheriff, in the case where we have a contentious sheriff's race, I think that is extremely important, and it will be a very low knowledge race. So making sure that at least some amount of materials can, or voter contact can happen, seems important. And I think adding $25,000 to that is not going to break the bank, but does make it start to look more like, oh, you could have a staff person for part of the campaign in addition to mail or something.
Okay, so 100,000 for the sheriff. I got that.
Yep.
Great. And that seems like excellent. Any other questions or thoughts on? Oh, thank you very much, Lisa, for confirming that. Any other thoughts or questions on this? What I have is general agreement on $650,000 for a candidate running for chair. 250,000 for a candidate running for county commission in all the districts. 50,000 for a candidate running for auditor, and then 100,000 for a candidate running for sheriff too. Great, excellent. And what I'll do is I'll also like plug those into the budget calculations we were doing earlier to see like what is that going to do to our budget.
And can you, if you're communicating that to others, those numbers sound exactly right, but especially for folks who haven't followed this conversation, can you just kind of remind people when you say those numbers that that's public funds only, and then the candidates would theoretically have whatever else they raised? So that's not total campaign budget. That's, public dollars in addition to what they've raised.
Totally. And candidates are always thrilled when I tell them that. So,
well, I mean, just for the other members of our group when you write it up so that people,
sure.
are thinking
Thank
right.
you. I appreciate the note. Thank you. I will communicate that. Okay. Any other thoughts on this topic on the match cap policy? Okay, great. Thank you. Well, I think, we're almost at time. Again, really wish we had a quorum to make it all the way through. Unfortunately, we just didn't this time. I think what I'm going to do from now on is I think I'm just going to record all of the presentation materials I have instead of giving it to you in the meeting and send it ahead of time, because that would probably make your time a little bit more efficient. I'm happy to give you like a summary in those meetings too. But I think it'd be more helpful to give it to you ahead of time. James.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think the materials ahead of time not only helps us, but I think could potentially be helpful to other members of the public who want to, learn more about this. I guess I'm going to leave it to your discretion, but I wonder if you would be willing to call some of the low attendance people and like talk to them, and basically just give the hard sell for like, this work's really important and we need them here.
I appreciate that. Also, I will disclose that Terrence did drop from the committee on Friday. So we are, working on either finding a replacement or we've run it past the county or run it past the attorney's office if we can lower the quorum requirements with the vacancy too. So hopefully we'll have an answer on either one. Beth.
Just for my own knowledge, what does that mean for the violation subcommittee? Because it was just Terrence and I.
Yeah, I wish we really had more time today. I was going to ask that we have a member if they're willing to shift over and join the violations committee. I think I'll just email that out to everyone, or potentially Beth, if we could just dedicate that conversation. Might be short enough that we could just dedicate that to a full IAC meeting and have you join another subcommittee as well. That's another option.
Yeah, we can also talk about this separately. I don't want to take up everybody's time, but we can check in about it.
Okay. Yeah, glad to do it. And then I think okay, thank you for the offer, Becca. And I'm just gonna make a note of that.
While for efficiency purposes, I absolutely agree of asking the attorney to lower the quorum to say we're only a 9-member advisory committee, and I will just lament it means that we have less representation from East Multnomah County on our committee, which is too bad.
Yeah, I mean, our first preference is that the commissioner appointed that find a replacement. That would be the most ideal option. But given that we're only a couple weeks out from having this, the deliverable done, it's that's like the hindrance there. but it won't be for lack of trying. Okay, and then I think like, you know, exploring whether or not more meetings are possible, but maybe they're more like informational meetings, and then we'll just schedule the votes towards the end and make sure we really have quorum for that too, is what I'm hearing. Okay. Well, any other thoughts or concerns before we go? And next time, again, we'll be talking about qualification metrics, and we'll be doing a report out from the subcommittees on their progress as well. But any other thoughts or concerns before we take off?
What materials are you thinking you're going to distribute to us with respect to that ahead of the next meeting?
The qualification metrics?
Yeah.
Topic? Yeah, we're gonna do an analysis of donors, like how many donors candidates have raised, how many donations candidates have raised, how many donors they typically have on the Marford County Commission, what's a realistic number. And then the secondary question is, do we have a requirement for in-district? So like you have to raise a certain number of donors within your district to qualify. And so that's an analysis we'll also have to. And like whether it's realistic to have, you know, be able to get to 250 in your district or 125 in your district or whatever the number is. Lisa.
Can you do I think to add a piece to that analysis, this is helpful to outline what you're bringing. It would be good to understand the percentage of the population that actually donates in a Multnomah County race.
Okay.
And then how many, if you're gonna make a recommendation about, if there's gonna be a discussion about how many of those donors have to be in your district, I'd like to see the number of donors for the races by district. Based on zip code, that's fine. It doesn't have to be perfect. But the wealth distribution in our county is wildly different.
So
Yeah, I think
And Daniel, could you also add if there are jurisdictions of similar size in terms of registered voters, what their, just as a point of information, what their threshold is to qualify?
sure, of course.
And remind me, this is both, we're considering you could donate or gather signatures, right? Like any combination, or that's also maybe a decision point.
That's the decision point for you all to make.
Yeah,
Some
okay.
programs do have a combo, some programs just do. I think the city of Portland just does donations. So that's for you all to decide. Okay. Okay, well, thank you all for your time. Really appreciate the guidance and wisdom here. And unless there's something further to say, I think we can let you all go. Okay, all right. Take
thanks,
care, everybody.
everybody.
Thank you.